All right, so we all witnessed that ridiculous Olympic performance that Steph Curry put on the other day. I would definitely go as far as to say that that was probably the greatest Olympic basketball performance of all time, and if not the greatest, then one of the three greatest, and one of the most iconic moments of Stephen Curry's illustrious Hall of Fame, arguably best point guard of all time career, right? And so in seeing that, I was doing a little bit of thinking. I also read a Bleach Report article that was talking about this. Has Stephen Curry put together a career? Has he put together a resume that's good enough for us to consider him a top five player of all time? Like, I think we need to start thinking about that with him. And it's kind of taboo because Curry's come up was relatively quick. It did not take Steph Curry a long amount of time at all to kind of enter those all-time conversations. That's why it seems kind of weird to put him there. But when we kind of take a step back and look at things and look at his resume and look at the things he's done, he definitely has as much of an argument to be in that top five as a lot of other guys who already are in that conversation have, right? So let's kind of take a look at things and let's ignore the resume and let's take a look at this first off. So for one, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, how quickly Steph Curry started entering those all-time conversations. It took Steph Curry under 3 seasons for him to establish himself as the greatest shooter in the history of the game of basketball. 3 seasons from 2015 to 2018. That's when we all collectively knew he was the best shooter ever. In that short span of time, he proved to be flat out the best at one of the most signature skills in all of sports. So for football, there's being able to catch and throw the ball. For baseball, it's being able to pitch and hit the ball. And for basketball, that's being able to shoot and dribble. Those are the 2 most signature skills for the game of basketball. And in 3 seasons, Steph Curry established himself as the greatest when it comes to being able to shoot the basketball. Usually we have entire careers to evaluate before comparing the best at like a specific thing. So for shooting, it was split between Reggie Miller and Ray Allen for a long time. But when Curry came in those 3 seasons, in that short span of time, he immediately elevated himself to a level that was way over those 2 guys, right? Curry stepped on their progress in basically just 3 seasons and made it impossible to argue for anyone over him in that particular category. I think the gap between him and the second best shooter of all time is pretty big. Then we talk about championships. So he has 4 titles, but when you look deeper at it, there's a really intriguing fact about it all, right? So he did it with a number of different supporting casts. So the rotation in 2015, outside of like their big 3 of Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, and himself, it was much different than the rotation pieces during the Durant era. And the same goes for what he wanted in 2022. Jordan did the same thing with the Bulls right in the 90s. There was a revolving door of supporting castmates around Jordan and Pippen when they won those 6 titles. So for the first 3, it was guys like Horace Grant, John Paxson, and in the last 3, it was guys like Dennis Rodman, Ron Harper, and players like that. LeBron as well, right? One thing people talk about a lot with LeBron is how he won multiple championships with different teams. He had a number of different supporting casts. Kobe as well. His first 3 championships were with Shaq. Then his last 2 with a completely different supporting cast with Paul Gasol, Lamar Odom, and players like that. So I'm saying to say this, right? A common objection to Curry being in a top 5 conversation is that he played with Durant, right? People always look at the Durant years and say that Curry would not have been able to win if it was not for Kevin Durant. Saying that is disingenuous because we saw him win in many different contexts. There was the pre-Durant era, there was the Durant era, and there was the post-Durant era. He won championships in each of those eras, right? And on top of that, right, one thing you have to look at when it comes to calling somebody a top 5 player and really just a top 10 player is repeated success. That is everything to being in that conversation. One thing that separates top 10 players from others is their ability to consistently get to that stage and that championship level. So that's where there's the divide between guys who are great and dominated their era, but they're not just top 10 just yet. It's because sometimes those players didn't repeat that championship success. Maybe they won 1, but they weren't consistent with that. We saw Curry be consistently great and consistently get to the highest stage in the NBA with winning 4 NBA championships. And even if we're not talking about winning, he has made a ridiculous amount of finals appearances. He's made 6 finals appearances over the course of his career. That puts him right in the same tier as a lot of guys that are considered top 5. Tim Duncan, Shaq, he has 1 less finals appearance than Kobe, and Michael Jordan has the same amount of appearances as Michael Jordan. He is in the cream of the crop of guys of the last 30 to 35 years as far as getting to that stage. And if we just simply discuss and fill in the rest of his resume and the other accolades he's received over the course of his career, he's got just as much of an argument as any other player that we consider top 5 right now. That includes guys like Magic. That includes guys like Kobe, Hakeem, Shaq, Tim Duncan, if we consider him on that list. We watched him quietly enter this list, right? And I feel like a lot of people by default don't really include him in that conversation because of how quickly and how quietly started stacking up his resume and things like that. But if we look at things and we take a step back and look at that resume, it is as good of a resume as a lot of other guys that we consider as top 5 players of all time. And his performance on the Olympic stage, again, simply one of the best individual performances in Team USA history, solidified his place, in my opinion, on the top 5 all-time list. And I know he's older, he's getting kind of to the latter part of his prime, but seeing what he does from this point forward, if he ends up winning another title and things like that, it's only going to continue to make his resume that much more attractive and continue to solidify his case as a top 5 player of all time, if he hasn't already convinced you of that, right? So we'll see what he does the rest of the way down. I think from here, everything is simply icing on the cake. Curry is one of those guys right now, despite what some people say, who has nothing else left to prove. Everything is icing on the cake. The conversation now for me is whether or not he can enter those top 3 conversations. If he ends up winning 5 championships and wins one more at the Warriors, I think with everything else he's done in the course of his career, you'd have to consider him possibly in that top 3. I really do. It seems crazy to say, considering how much we talk about Kobe, LeBron, and Jordan in that conversation. But if we take a step back and look at what Curry's accomplished, if he gets that 5, he has a very compelling case and compelling argument for being within that 3. So we'll see what Curry does the rest of the time down in his career. And hopefully this season, the Warriors can get back to being one of the cream of the crop teams in the Western Conference and hopefully return to being a title contender.